I am Monica Verra-Tirado, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Exceptional Education and Student Services with the Florida Department of Education. I have been there, this is going on my I'm completed my 6th year, so I realize this is now, I think, actually my 7th family cafe, so I'm pretty excited to be here in this particular position. I've got several of my team, my excellent team here. And if you guys could wave so that folks can see who you are. They are handing out comment cards so that you have an opportunity throughout the presentation either to reflect on something that you've heard or just in general. If you came to the conference or you've got something on your mind that you want to discuss, what we have found is that it's very busy here at Family Cafe, and so what we found works best is really to get your information, make that connection. It's great to get that face-to-face interaction, but then let's follow up when we get back to the office and we can have time for a longer call and really understand in more depth on what your challenges are or what your needs are. And that's been pretty successful. So for today's presentation, I'm going to be sharing about really the state of the state, the big picture, where things are in special education in Florida, how we're doing, the progress that we're making, and then at the end allow opportunities for, if time permits, for some questions and answers. A little bit about myself. First of all, I am a mom and a wife, but a mom to 4 adult sons, 2 of whom went through the school system with IEPs. They're both adults now. Well, they're both way into adulthood now, 28 years old and 26 years old. So I've probably participated in almost all the same programs that you all have as parents as well. And also, you know, a lot of the joys, also the challenges, and then, of course, what we learn, those of us whose children are into adulthood now, even late adulthood, it doesn't end, right? The challenges, the celebrations, the challenges continue. And so I think one of the biggest things is surrounding ourselves with others who are also on the journey is really, really important, because there are days that you can feel overwhelmed, wonder if you're, you know, am I doing this right? I question that myself, and I have a doctorate, and this is what I do for a living, and I question, did I do things right? Should I be doing things differently? So I think the most important thing as we're working through this journey is that we stay connected, that you connect with other families, stay connected at your district and your school, and then also with us. We want to be a network and a support to each and every one of you. And some of you I've worked with over the years, and perhaps can attest that what I'm sharing today, I really do am sharing with a sincere heart. Not perfect, but my heart really wants to do the very best that I can for your children. I started as a special education, well actually I started in general education, and I was, during my beginning years, we had a EBD at the time, Emotional Behavioral Disabilities Inclusion Model. And I had the opportunity to start a program where these students had been in a separate class, and we were fully including them. And that was my first exposure into special education, and I really fell in love with the program and just thinking about how can we do a better job of educating, you know, all students with significant complex needs, students with mild needs. I moved on and I became a special educator, got my master's in that, and then I became a leader at the school level and the district level, and then I've been now at the state for 6 years as the bureau chief, and just been very, just a pleasure to serve in this capacity. And can everybody hear me okay? Yes. And can everybody see this okay? Mm-hmm. All right. So this is information that we share when we go across the state as I'm working with principals and teachers and superintendents and school board members and families. And that is that our system really needs to be from preschool to post-school, that we are thinking about everything that the child needs, our students need to be successful upon exiting our system from the very minute that they enter. So that it's intentional. It's intentional that they're being prepared to leave our system as graduates who are college, career, and life ready. And that our students then have the full range of opportunities for successful adulthood, no matter what their unique abilities are. We know that there are all kinds of opportunities for students into adulthood, but we have to make sure that we prepare them for that. I always like to remind us what fundamentally IDEA is about. And it's a national policy. And I'm going to just kind of read this here. I typically don't read to folks, but improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy. Why? It ensures equality of opportunity, so it's a civil rights component, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. So in addition to being a civil rights and an equity issue, it also is a public policy around economics. So we have got to be sure that in our nation that everybody who can work should work. And we have to be sure that we're giving them the skills. People want to work. They want to contribute. They want to have meaningful adult lives and be as independent from us as parents as possible. And so this policy is much more than just ensuring that we have good programs in pre-K and first grade and second grade, but it's ensuring that those programs lead to these long-term outcomes for persons with disabilities in the United States of America. So in Florida, we've really focused on moving just from access to high quality education, but attainment. So we're going to really be focusing on what are the outcomes that we're getting. So in other words, if we're talking about, for example, inclusion, what are the outcomes that we see from inclusion? And ensuring that we have equity and excellence no matter where you live in Florida. One of my goals is no matter what your zip code is, what district you're in, that you have access to the same high quality, your child has access to the same high quality instruction and support. And so our three main focuses: increasing the number of students graduating college and career ready by improving the graduation rate, so that's something we're measuring, decreasing dropout rate, and improving post-school outcome results. Because like I said, so we can increase graduation, but if that doesn't lead to students actually then having meaningful post-school outcome opportunities, then it wasn't what we intended to do. We didn't meet our goal. This state systemic improvement plan is something that is required by the federal government, the Office of Special Education Programs, and at the U.S. Department of Education. They ask each state to really think about one area of huge focus and bring stakeholders together to talk through that and identify what that area is, identify infrastructure needs, set some goals, and then work towards those goals. So in Florida, our identified measurable result was increasing our statewide graduation rate for students with disabilities. The baseline data that year in 12-13 was 52.3%, and we wanted to increase it to 62.3% in 17-18. So this is now the end of that first piece of this ESSIP. So the 17-18, that's this year's cohort, the kids who graduated just now. And to close the graduation gap, we started with a 23.2% gap, meaning the gap between students without disabilities and students with disabilities. We want to close that gap by at least half, which would be less than 11.6% by 17-18. The focus of our ESSIP is for the state to work to help LEAs. When you see SEA, that stands for, in the federal language, State Educational Agency. LEAs is Local Educational Agency, meaning school districts in Florida, is to improve the way that we support local schools and school districts so that they can meet those goals. And so improving our strategies so we can help districts to improve their strategies. And then, of course, we'd be looking to see that leads to an increased graduation rate for students. So we have a theory of action that's grounded in the research, and that is from the National Center of Educational Outcomes. And it's called Moving Your Numbers, What Matters Most in Key Practices. And these are evidence-based practices that have been known to improve outcomes for students with disabilities, but also for all students. And so what's really good about these key practices is that when we share them with educators, whether it's a superintendent or a high school principal or an ESE teacher, everyone can kind of recognize the need for this. So the first one is use data well. We've got to have good data sources so we understand what tools we're using to measure growth, having very focused goals, measurable goals. And these are the same things, even if you think about it, goes down to the IEP level, doesn't it? You've got to have good data, you've got to have good goals. We need to select and implement shared instructional practices, so making sure that the activities that we're choosing to use, whether it's at the system level, the school level, the individual student level, these are highly likely to improve performance. And then we have to implement deeply, and that's the hard thing, that consistent and pervasive. So we know we've got a good strategy. Are we implementing it with fidelity? Are we implementing it if it's supposed to be done daily? Is it happening daily? If it's a school-based strategy, you know, how is that happening across the school? And the key here is the monitoring and providing feedback and support. So whether I'm a teacher and I'm monitoring the progress of my students, I'm a principal and I'm supporting my teachers going into the classroom, helping to reinforce if they're working on a strategy like differentiated instruction, those kinds of things. How am I creating a system to where I'm constantly monitoring and providing that feedback and support? And then the final thing is to be in a cycle of continuous inquiry and learning, and really learning together. So that would be all of us. So all educators, all parents, a lot of us wear multiple hats. Some of you probably wear both hats as a parent of a student with a disability, and also probably in some form or fashion, either in education or maybe you work for an agency. A lot of us are in this in multiple ways. So it's really working together as a community. This is just a picture of where we got that framework from NCEO. And this is our theory of action. Basically, if the state does these things, and these are just quick ideas, quick snapshots, then around these 6 key practices, then the districts will do these things, it'll impact schools, and then we'll have students who are engaged, making progress, and graduating college, career, and life ready. So really trying to make sure that our system is well aligned for all students to be successful, and being intentional about it. So our theory of action also includes the fact that research shows that particularly for graduation and reducing dropout, having the use of an early warning system where you use the data to identify how students are performing, and then when they get to the high school level in particular, monitoring the classes that they're taking. Are they taking the right courses for graduation? Do they have the right grade point average? Have they taken the correct assessments? Those of you who have students in high school, or you have adult students who've gone through high school, you know how important those pieces are. So that early warning system, Jim, are you trying to get my attention? Oh, okay. So that early warning system is an evidence-based practice that is known to help. And the other thing is that early warning system also helps us to see things like social emotional needs. So we're paying attention to attendance. We notice the students out a lot. What's going on? You know, reaching out to the family. If it's really if it's a medical need, what kind of services need to happen? Does the child maybe need hospital homebound services if it's going to be a prolonged illness? Those kinds of things. So the early warning system helps not just with graduation ultimately, but also that day-to-day kind of information that schools need to support students. And then we also have some other evidence-based practices, and there's so much more, but these are just a few, which is we have Check and Connect, which is a mentoring program. And so many of our high schools across Florida have adopted mentorship programs. And research is also clear that in addition to family support, students who have support, students who are at risk of not graduating, if they have at least one adult at their school, at their high school, that they can connect with and see as a mentor, who is checking in with them and supporting them and kind of cheerleading, that they are highly likely to not only graduate, but also take those skills into post-secondary and be more successful. So a lot of things are about relationships, really, right? Knowing that someone cares, has high expectations for me, believes in me. So that's a piece that we're doing. And when I go out to schools and districts and I'm meeting with students, I do student group focus groups. I also do parent focus groups. But a question I always ask, is there an adult in this building that you can go to, that you know you can count on and believes in you? And, you know, the good news is almost everyone can, some kids say, I can name 5. Some say, yes, I have 1. And then if we have a student who says no, we make sure before we leave, we connect that, we make sure the principal knows. And so this youth does not seem to have anybody they feel connected with, because that's a real risk sign. Even if they have a supportive family, if they don't have someone at the school they feel connected at, they're at risk. So this is just showing kind of the years of that state systemic improvement plan. And so we're here, and it'll continue through 2020, but the first year of looking at the data is going to be that 17-18 cohort, graduation cohort. And then when I talked about us rethinking the way the department and B's, the bureau that I oversee, supports districts and schools, we really identified the need to provide it in a multi-tiered approach so that all districts get a certain level of service. So for example, even if we were to think about family support, Family Cafe is open to every single parent. That would be universal support. Some families, schools, districts need a little bit more because there's something unique that's happening. So when we work with our districts as an example, that would be more of a focus. We might, let's say it's one area, seclusion and restraint. Then we create, we might go on and visit for that area. We create an action plan with them. We work side by side. We pull in our discretionary projects. You've had opportunity to meet many of our projects that are department funded. Family Cafe is a project that our department oversees. Project 10, Fiddlers, Florida Inclusion Network, FIN, Positive Behavior Support. I could go on and on, very special arts. So there's a lot of projects that probably people don't realize are actually under the Department of Ed, but you're like, no, we didn't know. Yeah, and so those are the projects. So in addition to services to families and students, the services to districts, and then we intensify those support based on the need. And then for districts with the most intensive need, we have very comprehensive on-site visits that we conduct, and we go on, we visit schools, we talk to parents, we talk to students, and we work with them for multiple years. If they're in intensive support, we stay in that kind of close relationship with that district for multiple years. So now I'm going to shift gears and we're going to talk about, so what's been going on? So we have these goals and we've got this strategy to provide support, and so what are the results? First, a little bit of demographic information. This shows the breakdown of our students with disabilities as of fall 2017. The vast majority of students, 38%, have a specific learning disability. This is speech impaired and language impaired, make up another broad group. Our most rapidly growing group is autism spectrum disorder, and we're seeing a decline of intellectual disabilities and an increase in ASD, autism spectrum disorder. And what it appears is that historically there were kids who were identified as having an intellectual disability who in fact have autism. And so I think as the field is getting better at diagnosing autism, we've seen that shift. We also have a little bit of an increase in other health impaired, but that corresponds to a decrease in emotional behavioral disabilities. So we're seeing that area go down. And there's other includes visually impaired, deaf and hard of hearing, traumatic brain injury, physical impairment. We have all kinds of so there's 13 categories altogether, but altogether the others category comes up to 9%. Our overall population is growing, so we are, we continue to grow. And in particular this year we had many families who came to us from Puerto Rico, who had students with disabilities, as well as the Virgin Islands. So we're also growing not only just in our own growth, but also from other countries who are joining us. Now, so a couple of things that we focused on as we were moving forward with our goals, and that is that research is clear. Over 30 years of research since IDEA, which is the law that governs all of this, came into effect, that students with disabilities, for the most part, who spend the more time with students without disabilities in the general education classroom with the supports happening there, are more likely to have improved outcomes and also post-school outcomes, not just in school, but post-school. Because again, our goal is that our students, when they leave, are able to interact and be successful in society, right? Have friends, be in the community. So it's not just about I got an A in my math class, it's did that transfer into me being a citizen who can be engaged in society at a high level. So we've been focusing on increasing our inclusion rates. Now, I always want to preface this. Our goal is not 100%. Why? Because IDEA is clear that for some students, a separate placement, maybe even a separate school, perhaps a residential placement may be necessary for their unique needs. So I want to make that clear. Some people see that and they're like, oh my gosh, maybe my child's in a center school. Usually every year some parent comes in and says, are you saying we don't want center schools? I said, I'm not saying that at all. But we're saying that the vast majority of students with disabilities, including some with the most complex needs, can be met satisfactorily in the general education environment. So here you see, and if I went back further, for a long time we were around 50%. Only 50% of our kids spent 80% or more of their day in a regular class placement. As of this fall, we're at 73.3%. I think that's what that says. No, 73.8%. 75. Thank you guys. I can't see. 75.8. So that's our highest that we've ever had. And when we look at, I like to then break that down. What does that look like for districts, though? So here's our overall improvement, right? 18.4%. Back in 05-06, only 7 districts had greater than 70% of their students in the general ed environment. In 17-18, 62 districts had 70%, greater than 70% in the general education environment. So you can see that's a big shift, right? We have still, though, 3 districts with less than 55% in 17-18. Those districts are really working on identifying ways that they can increase inclusive strategies. We have 12 districts where greater than 85% of their students spend the majority of their day in a general education environment. And it's interesting because I met with a group of center school principals yesterday. I was here. Some of you probably saw me running to the parking lot. I went to another meeting and came back. And some of the center schools, and because parents were concerned, does this mean, again, if we're at high levels of inclusion, I really love a center school, it's great, is this going to close down? And no, it hasn't impacted. If parent, and another thing, in Florida, if you're at a separate school, it's a parent choice. You know, so, and you have to give consent to be at that separate school. And so that's still an option for some families, but at the same time, we're increasing inclusion for most kids. And this is how we compare with the 7 largest states. And I'm going to show some other data as we continue on about how we compare. So we're at 71.9. This was for 15-16, and this is the United States was at 62.7, and then this is the other 7 largest states. One thing that's really important to note is that Florida is now the 3rd largest state in the nation with population. So I believe it's California, Texas, Florida. We surpassed New York. New York used to be higher than us. We are now larger. So we're the 3rd largest state in the United States. And that's why I like to get a sense of how do we compare to those other very large states. Now, as inclusion has been going up, so is that a good thing? We don't know, right? And sometimes we get a little nervous as parents and teachers. Is this going to hurt kids? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be good for kids with disabilities? What about general ed? Is it going to hurt general ed? That's like an urban myth. Inclusion is going to water down general ed, and all kids are going to drop out because it's going to just be this horrible thing. So let's see what the data says, right? So here's where we were. Back in 08-09, our graduation rate, our federal graduation rate for students with disabilities was 37.3. Only 37.3% of our kids were leaving with a standard diploma. That was in 4 years. For students who took a little bit more time, it was a little bit better. It was at 49.8, but it still was not the majority. That's less than 50%. And this was all kids, okay? So this was the graduation rate for all kids. What we have seen, this is 16-17. So we now are up to 66% graduating within 4 years, 66.1 who may take a little bit more time, and 82% for all kids. So a couple things have happened here. As we've increased inclusion, because you saw the number on inclusion going up, students without disabilities have improved, and students with disabilities have also improved to a great degree, and the gap is closing. Okay, and I'm going to show some other data to help us to put that in context. So that is really exciting, to go from 37% to be at 66%. And in fact, well, I'll keep going because there's some really cool data that I think you'll enjoy seeing. And then again, I like to break that down. What does that mean? So 25% points between 05-06 and 16-17, we've gone up in graduation. Back in 05-06, we only had 19 districts that were graduating at least half of their kids with a standard diploma, and that's students with disabilities. In 16-17, we had 71 districts that were graduating more than half of their students with disabilities with the standard diploma. We now have 0 districts that are graduating less than 30%, but we did have for a few years, look at that, in 13-14, I had 3 districts that had less than 30% of their kids graduating with a standard diploma. And we had 5 districts this year who had greater than 90% of their students with disabilities graduating with a standard diploma. This breaks it down by type of diploma, including the special diploma. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the special diploma in just a second. So on the left, you see the standard diploma. What this means is that 50% of our kids with disabilities, they met the exact same requirements as every other student to get that diploma. They passed the required end of course exams, they passed the FSA, they had the correct courses and the right GPA. An additional 29% utilized the waiver option. And what that means, and make sure if you're a parent of a high school student, is if your child has accommodations that are allowed in class for classroom assignments, things like text-to-speech, speech-to-text, other things like that, but they're not allowed on a standardized assessment, then the IEP team can meet to determine whether if they didn't pass the standardized assessment, whether or not it was a result of the accommodations not being allowed. And if that's the case, they can waive the results, and the student, because if the students demonstrated through their grade point average, their class tests, that they had if they've been able to demonstrate through all of those things, they will then graduate with that same standard diploma as of everybody else, okay? And then this is our special diploma, and we're down with our special diploma. One thing I've noticed, as we've seen our special diploma go down, we initially see more requests for waivers, and what I see when I'm out in districts and working with schools is that some students who would have in the past been on the special diploma, when they're on the standard diploma now, they require more intensive accommodations, and those students may be more likely to need the waiver because their accommodations are much more intense. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But the good news is, with those accommodations, they didn't need to be on the special diploma. They were on a standard diploma. So we see that decrease, and here's our dropout has gone down each year pretty significantly to 16, 17. Now, and then we have 61 districts that have a less than 20% dropout, 4 districts less than 30, and 16 or greater than 30. So these are the ones we're worried about. When I said how we provide intensive support, when I use data to provide intensive support, these are the kinds of things that I mean. I would say, okay, we've got 16 districts that have less than 5%, so they would get universal support, meaning they're doing really good, and I'm actually going to encourage other districts to go visit them and find out what's happening, that their dropout rate's so low. And then districts that have that higher rate, how can we partner with you? Let's look at the data, let's find out what's happening. Are the students really dropping out? Are you coding? Because what we found sometimes is this, in order to use data well, the data has to be correct. And sometimes we go to districts and we find that in some cases kids were coded as a dropout. Let me give you an example. I found 5 kindergartners coded when they left the school district and moved. The code that was given to them actually showed up as a code for dropout. So unless you drill down to the data, they didn't drop out, they moved. But they got the wrong code. So unless you know how to drill into the data to figure out, okay, what's really going on with dropout? Who are our real dropouts? So you got to really know your data. That's that key principle 1, use data well. So then we could say, okay, your kindergartners aren't dropping out. That's not the problem. Who's really dropping out? And so we're working with these districts, and honestly, I think it's less than this. But do we still have students who drop out? We do. We have a dropout challenge? We do. But we've got to make sure we have good data so that we can then have the right interventions. Because if we don't have the right interventions, if we don't use data well, we won't put the right interventions in place. So I want to take a second, though. I want to go back to something pretty cool. In 14-15, legislature repealed the special diploma, and all students began that year working on one Florida diploma. So there's no more special diploma for new students. Every student who was starting 9th grade in 14-15, they all started on the same standard diploma, with 90% of students with disabilities participating in traditional standards and 10% around participating in what we call our access points. And those are for students with significant cognitive disabilities. So those students, which is a very small percent, have access courses, and we're going to talk a little bit about the data that we have from that. But their pathway with those access courses leads to the same diploma as all other students. So this year, 17-18, is the first cohort of students, graduating cohort, where every student who graduated would graduate, I'm getting goosebumps, glory, is graduating with the same standard diploma. And so we won't have that data yet to display. I'll have it this time next year for sure, because what happens with 17-18 is, obviously it just happened, a lot of the ceremonies just finished, and then also youth students who maybe needed to do a credit or make up a class, they have all through August to finish, and they would still count in the 17-18 cohort data. Now, a fear that we had as a community was when the special diploma went away, oh no, kids are going to drop out, nobody's going to graduate. Well, the kids who were in 9th grade then, we have the biggest cohort we've ever had, meaning they've stuck it through. This graduating class, and I'm getting goosebumps again, is the largest graduating class of students with disabilities that we've ever had, and not just because we've grown as a state, proportionately in the history of special education in Florida. And our dropout rate is the lowest. So kids on this new, more rigorous pathway, despite our fears that they would drop out, be disengaged, they're not. They're staying in school. They know, we believe they can do it with the right supports, and they are doing it. And so we are like over the moon with this news. Super exciting. But this is a piece that we're going to continue to drill deeply into, and this is the FETPIP data. FETPIP is a data collection system that looks at all students a year after graduation and finds them and identifies where they are. Are they in work? Are they in community? Are they in the military? Are they in prison? You know, really, it's trying to figure out where are our kids after they graduate. And so this is the data we really want to push forward. Now, I don't have the data here, and I should bring it. But for all students, it's not much better than this, just so you know. I think for all students, it's like maybe 60%, but it's not like all students are at 100%. But what this is showing is this green line is our students with disabilities who are in any kind of employment or any kind of continuing education, our students who are in higher ed, specifically higher ed, or competitively employed, and then our students who are in higher ed. And what we see is an increase of our students being found in any type of competitive or employment, or any type of continuing ed is getting higher. So all of these indicators are going up slightly. We want to really see them go up significantly. We want them to be, to close the gap between this and all students. Because this, again, goes back to our whole goal is that when you leave our system, you have just as much of an opportunity to be competitively employed, to be in post-secondary, to have a great life as a person without a disability. So this is the kind of data that we want to really see improve. But it is going in the right direction, so we're excited about that. And then these going back to our goal. Remember I said we set those goals with the feds as to where we would be in 5 years? So when we started, this is all students. This is students with disabilities here. And this was our goal. So we started at 52.3%. And remember our goal was 60, here's our goal, 60.3. So we already exceeded our original goal for 16-17. We exceeded by 6 points. So we went from here, like rapid increase right there. So that's pretty exciting. And in fact, people are writing about that at the national level. I recently got an article sent to me that was mentioning several states that seem to be doing something different that is moving kids forward at a greater rate. Now, I'm going to show you some other data that's going to help us answer the question, okay, so kids are graduating, but what about their knowledge when they're leaving school? Okay. And then this shows the percent gap. Remember, we're trying to close that gap. So this is the gap going down. We want to get less than 11% gap. Of course, we want no gap at all, but for our 5-year goal, so we're going in the right direction there. And then this was our dropout. We have not met our target for dropout. These are our targets, but we are going down. So obviously, a target for a dropout is graduation 100%, dropout 0%. That's where we want to be, and we need to just keep working towards that. Now, we're going to talk about the National Assessment of Educational Progress. That's the NAEP. And that is data that every state participates in, and it compares state to state so that we get a better sense of how we're doing compared to other states, okay? So let's talk about a couple things before I go into the data. So first of all, you know we've been working hard on increasing inclusive practices in Florida. We've been working on increasing graduation and decreasing dropout, improving post-school outcomes, and we've seen some progress in that. We eliminated the special diploma. We have a standard diploma for all. So the question kind of really is, so okay, how are our kids doing? Is all of this really making a statewide difference? So let's take a look at this. So I'm going to explain this graph, and then each of the graphs that follow mirror this, okay? And so what this is showing here is, this is NAEP reading, 4th grade reading. This side's Florida, that side's the nation, okay? This shows from 2003 our scale score of 184, going all the way to 2017. Our scale score went up to 206. These are students with disabilities on the bottom. The top are students without disabilities in Florida. This line here represents the gap, so a 39% gap to 27% gap, or point gap, okay? This is the nation, starting at 184. Scale score 186. So let's just look right now. What do we see happen for our 4th grade students with disabilities as opposed to the nation? How do we compare to the nation?
We went down, they went up. We went up.
They went up.
We went up.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I knew you knew it. Yeah, because you said it happy, so I knew you would. We went up significantly. They went down. What happened to? Yeah. Yes. What happened to our students without disabilities? That's the top line. We're outperforming them. And what happened to our gap? Much smaller. Did inclusion hurt kids without disabilities? No. So that's the first thing we can cross off the table. That's the fear. Remember I said, oh, they're including kids. Did it hurt our kids? No. So what we see now is, and something that's happening that's very different than the national trend. Let's continue to go through these. Here's 8th grade reading. You're going to see the same trend. So here we go. We went up substantially for our students with disabilities. All students went up. Our gap went down. This is the nation, students with disabilities. So we're outperforming the nation. Our gap is smaller, and all students are comparable, or students without disabilities in 8th grade reading are comparable with the nation. But students with disabilities in Florida are actually higher than students with disabilities across the nation. 4th grade math, our students are higher than the national average. Both students with disabilities, students without disabilities. Look at our gap. What's happening with the 4th grade math gap for the nation? It's getting bigger. The performance is getting poorer and the gap is getting bigger. And then here's our 8th grade. Look at the gap there. So for students with disabilities across the nation, their data is actually going down. The gap is getting much bigger than it was. Our gap is getting smaller. Our data is improving. In this particular data source, this is the one where our students without disabilities are lower than students without disabilities at the national level. But you can see our students with disabilities significantly outperformed those with disabilities at the national level. So, remember I said I like to think about us as compared to the 7 largest states? So here we go. Here's Florida. What this represents is students with disabilities, students without disabilities. So just take a second and look at that. This is 4th grade math. Here's California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. What do you notice about Florida? Yeah. We're the highest in each area, and our gap is the smallest. And there's that gap. I put the gap data by itself so you can really see it. We have the smallest gap. 4th grade math. Let's look at 8th grade math. It's hard to see. Our 8th grade math is right kind of comparable for students without disabilities, but we are actually the highest for students with disabilities compared to the other 7 large states. And there's our gap. Fourth grade reading. You can see it really significantly there. There's our gap. 8th grade reading. And there's our gap. This shows us compared to the nation. This top line is the national gap. This kind of shows you what's happening to the 4th grade gap nationally. And this is Florida's gap. So you see from the nation continues to get, the gap widens. Our gap is getting smaller for 4th grade math. That's the national gap, Florida gap. 4th grade reading, national gap, Florida's gap. 8th grade reading, national gap, Florida's gap. So we're going to stop just for a second there. So to answer anyone's questions when they say, well, you know, maybe graduation is increasing because kids are just getting pushed and people are just passing them along, or it's social promotion. The data suggests that when you compare our students with kids nationally and also with the 7 largest states, our kids are learning a great deal. Their skills, you know, the NAEP doesn't lie. I mean, that's not our state test, it's a national test. So I think that's pretty solid support that a lot of the things that we're doing are moving us in the right direction. Like I said, in fact, so much that these kinds of things, people are saying, what are you doing? What is happening in Florida that's causing the gap to close? And also, again, the main thing, not the main thing, but one thing, of course, people always want to know is, does inclusion, you know, sometimes people push back, well, we can't have inclusion because it'll water things down. It's not. Everybody is improving. And that's what 30 years of research said, is, again, that the more that we can have students with disabilities engaged in spending time with kids without disabilities to the extent possible, the better likely they will be to improve academically, socially, emotionally, and better prepared, what's the most important thing, post-school, for life afterwards, right? To be engaged in the community, to have the social skills and the confidence to be out there and be engaged in the community. I think we're doing okay on time. So this, we're going to talk a little bit about our students on our alternate assessment, okay? So one thing we pay a great deal of attention on is making sure that students in Florida, that the small percent of students with significant cognitive disabilities that I said is around 10% of students with disabilities, about 1% of the population, but about 10% of students with disabilities, is that those kids are taking the test. And that we're not having, for example, a student who has like maybe just a speech impairment taking an alternate assessment. That wouldn't be appropriate. That's not a speech impairment by itself is not a cognitive disability. You guys following me? So we really want to make sure we're holding kids to high expectations. So we monitor the data to make sure that we are close to the 10%. And so here we were at 10.3. Our state target is to stay at the 10%. We've gone up just a little bit. The other thing that's important with that is that we cannot, and it's not appropriate for us to say, and we never would, for the record, we have to be at the 10 because that would mean maybe a district would say, okay, you're child number 10, 11, you're going to bump us up so you can't be on the alternate assessment, even though, let's say, it was really, really appropriate, a student with an obvious cognitive disability. So there's no punishment or anything, but it's a way to help work with districts and to make sure, you know, are we close to that number? We also want, okay, so this was for reading, and this is math. So we're very close to the 10% for both reading and math, and right at the target for math. Now, at the federal level, they have put a cap on the number of students who can actually participate in the alternate assessment. However, what we know is, again, it's illegal at the same time. They put a cap, but then at the same time it's illegal to say, okay, you can't take the alt assessment because you just bumped us over our ratio. They can't do that either. So what the feds have said basically is they've got this out there, but it's up to the state to work with districts to just really kind of monitor, make sure we've got the right kids in the right courses, et cetera. And that's what we're doing to make sure that we don't have kids that is maybe in, it's not appropriate because it's not the right assessment for them. They don't have a cognitive disability. So what we've done is ensure that our districts and schools and teachers understand, and families, that it's the standard that drives the course your child's in, and then that's what drives the assessment that they take. If you're in the traditional Florida standards, those are traditional general ed courses that all kids can take. Most of our kids, so that means 90% of our kids with disabilities are taking these courses, mostly in the general ed environment, because that's what we've been talking about. Some may be in a separate environment. They take the Florida standard assessment. Our access points, which again I said is about 10% of our students with disabilities, they take access courses, they take the Florida Standards alternate assessment, okay? Our courses though are setting neutral, meaning an access course can happen in a general education classroom as an inclusion opportunity. So, and I was just meeting with a parent whose child is getting ready to go to middle school, and that child is going to be fully integrated in his middle school on access points into general education. So we've been training general ed teachers on how to use the access points so that, and the really cool thing is the access points are aligned exactly to the standards. So if I'm a gen ed teacher and I know my standards, and now I'm thinking about having a student with a significant cognitive disability, the access points are helpful for them because they know then here's how I can break that standard down to the level of complexity of the student in my classroom. And so because of that, we're seeing an increase of gen ed teachers. It's amazing. I get goosebumps on this one too, who are asking to be trained in access points. And in fact, the parent I was just with said, it's not as much as, and it may not be true yet for everybody, but this parent is saying it used to be I felt like a fight. Now it's more like we've got the tools, the teachers are feeling they have the tools and the resource to do this and to do it well. The same thing could happen for a general education course. That may have to be in a separate class. Perhaps maybe it's a student with a very significant behavioral emotional disability. They could take that same class in gen ed, but it maybe is in a separate, smaller environment, and it only has students with disabilities. So we want our classes to be setting neutral, of course, with the goal being as much as possible for that to happen in an integrated environment. But we know that there's a continuum of services, and some students may need a separate environment. So here's who's been taking our alternate assessment. Almost 60% are actually identified as having an intellectual disability. Okay, about 31% are students identified as having autism. When we break down our kiddos on the spectrum, about half take the traditional test and about half take the alternate assessment. Each year we see about a split right down the middle. Other groups, we have orthopedically impaired, 242 kids, OHI, other health impaired, 991. This is the number that worries me, SLD 340. Because if you have a specific learning disability, one of the criteria for that eligibility is that you don't have a cognitive disability. So SLD is it's ruled out that you have a cognitive disability. So what we do is we work to identify with the districts. We see some kids who are SLD taking the test. Did you report, did you code them? Because remember, the data we get, someone had to put in a computer and it gets sent to us. So the first question is, is Johnny really SLD, or did it just get reported incorrectly? If he is SLD, why is he on the alternate assessment? Let's talk about this. What's going on? And in some cases he is, but the team's in the middle of doing an extensive reevaluation because they believe that maybe he has autism or he has an intellectual disability. But remember, ASD does not, about half those kiddos are taking traditional standards classes. So these are the groups that we're really looking at. And here, when we break down the other, we have 7 kids who reported as speech only taking the alternate assessment. This is traumatic brain injury, dual sensory, hospital homebound, EBD 141, visually impaired DHH, and then language impaired 306. So again, most of those disabilities by themselves do not have a cognitive component. However, some of these kids, for example, this could be a student who's IND and language impaired and somehow got coded as only language impaired. So our first step when we're using data well is to make sure we've got the right data. And then we can drill down and find out, okay, is this appropriate? And it's not the state's job to tell a team it's appropriate, but our job is to give them some guidance and say, okay, you know, what is it? Is a student, for example, well, they are reading at a first grade level. Okay, that could be severe dyslexia. You could be gifted and have severe dyslexia and read at a first grade level. You know, so that the alt assessment wouldn't be appropriate. So we're making sure we're asking those kinds of questions. We're giving them questions to say, please take these things back to your team, your IEP team, your parents, and let's make sure that it's not because the student didn't have the access to appropriate accommodations in the traditional standards. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. So you can see this is our percent of IND and ASD kiddos that are taking the FSAA. And by the way, in 15-16, we had a new test. We had the FSA, the Florida Standards Assessment, or the Florida Alternate Assessment. And then now we have the Florida Standards Alternate Assessment. So what happened is, if you remember, because probably most of you have family, kids, whatever, who don't have disabilities, or who are kiddos who take the traditional test. So the state redid, when we aligned with our new Florida standards, the test that all kids take, the FSA, and then a year after we did the alternate, because we have to kind of rotate through. And so this is the first year we did the new alternate. This shows our monitoring and the decrease in areas like kiddos with SLD, language impairment, EBD, taking the alt assessment. So we're really monitoring that data and trying to get that down. And then same thing. So those are the areas that we're like, oh no, why are they on the alt assessment? Those numbers are going down. So that's a good thing. All right, so here's our trend data for our alternate assessment. Our goal is that 80% of our students are proficient or satisfactory in our alternate assessment. And so this is in the old test based on the old standards, we were at high levels, 71%, 72% showing proficient. Just like with the FSA for all students, Amy, tell me I have 5 minutes. When we had the new test, we saw it drop, and that happened for all kids in Florida with the new assessment. So we're now at 59%, and then, no, that was 53%, and then it went up to 55%. So that first year we went down, but we're beginning to go up again. And if you work with the alternate the new standards and the alternate assessment, if you're a teacher or a parent, you know that it's much more rigorous. The expectations are higher, but still the majority of our kids are showing proficient. And this is actually higher than our kiddos who are taking the FSA. So our kids on the access point are more likely to be proficient than our kiddos who are taking the FSA, the traditional assessment. So that is for reading, and then this is for math. So you see that dip the first year of the new test, and you see we went down, but now we're already starting to go back up. So we're excited about that trend. And so this just kind of, again, summarizes what I went over, that we're seeing in improvement. Do I have time for parent survey results?
I'm going over at my session at 2 o'clock.
Oh, are you?
Yes.
So you're trying to get people to come to your session?
Sure.
Amy's going to go over in depth. I'll just give a quick brief.
Catch them on the way out the door.
Yeah, exactly. I'll give a quick overview, though. One of the things with our parent survey is that we really, when I first came on, we were getting really low numbers of participation. And so it's really difficult with the state this size to say if that means anything. Because, if we're only hearing from a small number of families, I don't know how valuable that information is, because how well does it represent the entire state? And so this is for 16-17, and I'm going to show you a chart that shows, okay, hold on one second. Well, first let me go through this. So for last year, we have our data in. This year, our survey is just finishing up. Amy, when does it exactly finish?
It finished June 8th.
Oh, it's done.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we heard from 33,000 last year parents, and when the first year we started, how many parents did we hear from?
It's 2.8%.
Yeah, it was really low, but we tripled that, and 4,399 of preschool. What this represents is the number of parents who reported satisfactory on the majority of the items. So 77% of parents in K-12 and 73%. Our goal is to get closer to 80%. I think a thing that I found though when I work with parents and and as a parent myself, it feels like there's either things are going really well or they're not going well at all. There's hardly there's not like a medium, right? So the people who are not in the 77 are like not it's not like, well, I'm kind of happy. I'm like, no, I'm really not satisfied at all. Does that make sense? It's not,
absolutely.
Okay. But for the most part, on any given day, the majority, high levels of our parents say, doesn't mean that they're saying it's perfect. I don't think there's anybody who would say it is perfect, but say, I have a good IEP team. I'm able to communicate with them. My child's making progress. Those kinds of things, because those are some of the survey items, and Amy will be going over that. And here you can see our progress over the years. Here's where you can see the difference in our responses. So for we heard from 9,000 parents in 12-13, and we increased it to 33,000. So now we're closer to a 10% response rate, which that sounds like, you're only hearing from 10%. That's actually a lot. For anybody here who's done survey work, trying to get responses to surveys hard. So hearing from 33,000 families, I think gives us a better estimate as to whether that's reflective of our families in Florida. These are the things that parents tend to say are top areas. This is what parents want more of. How to get other services, connecting with other families, training on how I can support my child in their education. For K-12, they report things are written in a way they can understand, teachers are available to speak with them, etc. They want more information on transition, agency support, how do I make sure, things like this, right? While you come here, what are all the other things I don't know? The school offering training. So again, what we're hearing from parents is, and we want to see improvement in these, is I would like more training on how I can best support my child's needs. And then whether or not you were offered special assistance if you needed that in order to participate. So far, here were our numbers last year. This was in May. So remember, Amy said it closed in June. Do you have the final numbers? No. Okay, that's okay.
We're over 10%.
We're over 10%, but look at that. We heard from another almost 3,000 families this year. So I'm really, really excited about that. Last slide. This shows this is from the National Center on Dispute Resolution and Monitoring from OSEP. And what this shows is the number of due processes, written complaints, etc., compared to the population. Okay? And remember, we're a very large population. So here's where Florida is as it relates to due processes, written state complaints, mediations. We have a fair share. We get a lot of, we're kept very busy, let me put it that way. But the thing is our population is so big that in relation to that, it's very small numbers. And we've done a lot in our bureau to try to support local resolution through things like facilitated IEPs at no cost. We send a neutral facilitator in that's been trained to help the IEP team work through issues, state mediation at no cost, things like that to really help families and districts who are at that impasse work through those issues in a way that can support everyone.
And I want to give a plug real quick.
Yeah.
At 2:30 at our session, we will go in more in depth with the dispute resolution that are available to parents.
So with that, it's a reminder as we continue on this really important journey from preschool to post-school, our goal is everything should be aligned. We're working as a community, we're working as a family. We try to avoid friendly fire, meaning everybody who's in special education, whether you're the teacher or you're the parent or a community member, ultimately we're all here because we care about persons with disabilities. And the more we can get together and work on the same side and work through our issues that way, we see so much more progress for our kids. Because if not, our kids get caught in the middle. And so we really are trying to work on encouraging that continued collaboration and partnership. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be your bureau chief. I appreciate you guys very much. Thank you. Okay.